What if I told you that a cowboy faced a gang of outlaws in the desert to save an innocent life? That's right. In the vast and unforgiving Old West, where life and death are always lurking, a man named Jack Carter made a decision that would change the course of his history, and that of a girl he barely knew. But what Jack did wasn't just brave, it was unthinkable. Imagine the scene: the scorching heat of the desert, the endless expanse of dry, lifeless land, and a young girl lost, with no one to protect her. Ellen Thompson, an orphan who found herself alone, directionless, and at the mercy of a cruel fate. But what she didn't know was that the Skinner brothers, one of the most feared gangs in the West, were about to cross her path. And when these men arrive, the only certainty is fear, despair, kidnapping. Have you ever been in a moment where you felt completely powerless, as if the weight of the world was on your shoulders, and the only choice was to fight or lose everything? Jack Carter, a cowboy marked by his tough decisions, found himself in the same dilemma. Should he run as he always did and continue his solitary journey, or risk everything, put his life on the line to save a stranger and do something that many would think impossible? What would you do in a moment like that? Jack's answer wasn't simple, nor was it easy. He knew that the Skinner brothers gang wasn't just a group of ordinary criminals. These men were ruthless, known for their violence and cruelty. When the gang steps in, nothing escapes unharmed, and Ellen, unprotected and hopeless, was about to be dragged into a dark fate. Now imagine being in Jack's shoes. He had no time to hesitate. One wrong move, and everything would be lost. But unlike many who would rather steer clear of trouble, Jack did something no one expected. He faced the threat head-on. He stood up to the Skinner brothers. What happened next? What did he do to face not only the desert storm, but also the fury of this gang of outlaws? And more importantly, how did this transform the life of a girl who until that moment was about to be lost forever? What you'll discover now might surprise you and make you question how far courage and compassion can take someone. Stay with me until the end, because Jack's decision will show you how one action, no matter how difficult and unexpected, can change destinies forever. In the next chapter of this story, we'll explore how Jack Carter confronted the Skinner brothers and what made him more than just a cowboy, but a true hero of the Old West. Now think for a moment. If you were in Jack Carter's place, facing an impossible choice between saving a life or continuing your solitary journey, what would you do? Each of us has had to make tough decisions, those that challenge us to act even when the path seems uncertain and dangerous. Sometimes it's those choices, no matter how difficult, that define us. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Stories like this aren't just about the Old West or about cowboys and outlaws. They're about courage, about that moment when we have the chance to change something or someone, and we choose to make a difference. I want to know, what touched you the most so far? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between the easy way and the right way? Leave a comment and share your experience. When you share how you feel, you help create a space for exchange and support. And that's what makes our community even stronger. Your participation here is what helps this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, which truly makes a difference in the lives of those who watch. And if you're enjoying this journey, this type of story, don't forget to like the video. Your like isn't just a simple gesture, it's a way of showing support and saying that stories like this deserve to be heard, that you believe in the power of courage and change. By liking, you help spread this message to more people who may be inspired and connect with what we're sharing. And of course, if you want to keep following content like this and stay updated with each new episode, subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you're not just following the content, you're joining a community of people who believe in stories that impact and transform. Here, we want to continue bringing you accounts full of emotion, courage, and of course, lessons from the Old West that, even as time passes, continue to teach us about humanity and purpose. Now stay with me, because the story of Jack and Ellen will surprise you even more, and we're about to reveal how, in moments of great risk, Jack not only saved a life, but also found something he never imagined. The sun burned the horizon, and the biting desert wind seemed to want to tear at the skin. It was as if the very air itself was against any attempt at survival. The silence on one side and the vastness of the desolate land on the other created a feeling that, in the desert, there was no room for mistakes. Every step seemed to echo for miles, every breath harder than the last. There, The heat wasn't just physical, but almost an oppressive force that seemed to swallow everything around. For those who were lost, there was no help. The desert made no distinction. If you weren't prepared, you simply wouldn't survive. In the middle of this vastness, Ellen Thompson walked aimlessly, alone. A young girl, orphaned and unprotected, who found herself thrown into this unforgiving setting, trying to find what was left of hope in a world that had taken everything from her. She didn't know what to do. All that remained were the dunes and the endless sky above. The wind blew fiercely, carrying her steps, and with them, her last bit of strength. It was as if the desert wanted to test how far she could go, but the worst was yet to come. And while Ellen took another uncertain step, not knowing what the future held, the desert held a secret she never imagined. The Skinner brothers gang was lurking. It wasn't just the vastness of the desert that threatened the girl's life, but the ruthless men hiding in the shadows, ready to capture her. The Skinner brothers were known for their cruelty, and their name sent shivers down people's spines. They were more than outlaws, they were a nightmare. For this gang, there was no difference between woman, child, or man. What mattered was what they could take, what they could destroy. They fed off the pain of others, off destruction, off imposing fear. There wasn't a soul who could escape their grasp. Where they went, they left a trail of terror. Where they stepped, destruction was certain. It was a wave of violence, boundless, merciless. Nothing could stop them, many said. They were fast, smart, and ruthless. And when the Skinner brothers set their sights on something, no human force could stop them from getting there. For them, a life was just another bargaining chip, another piece on their board of cruel ambitions. And so, with this relentless group of outlaws closing in, Ellen found herself in imminent danger. Without friends, without weapons, without anyone to protect her life, she was just an easy target. At that moment, the desert, which was already unforgiving, became even more threatening. The heat, which had previously seemed oppressive, now felt like a forewarning of something much darker. The wind was no longer just a hot breeze. It was a sign that something or someone was coming. And in that desolate landscape, the last thing Ellen could imagine was that a solitary cowboy, known for avoiding any kind of conflict, would be the only person who could save her life. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this topic. Why would Jack Carter, a man marked by his past and loneliness, decide to change the course of history and face off against such a feared and merciless gang? What did he find within himself at that moment of decision? Let's explore, because his journey wasn't just beginning. It was about to reveal a much greater purpose than he ever imagined. But before we move on, I'd love to hear from you. What would you do if you were in Jack's place? If suddenly your life and someone else's depended on an instantaneous decision, would you have the courage to act even with fear and doubt taking over? Leave a comment. I'm on this journey too, and share your thoughts. I'd love to know what you think about this moment of courage that changed everything. Ellen Thompson was just a girl when she found herself abandoned in the vast desert of the Old West. Without family, without friends, lost in a place where loneliness was even more intense, she carried the weight of the world on her fragile shoulders. Her life, which already seemed to crumble with the death of her parents, was marked by the need to survive. With a heavy heart, she walked through the dunes aimlessly, trying to find some sort of shelter, something she could call safety. But the desert, with its relentless vastness, left no room for hope. Each passing day felt like another test. There was no mercy. Ellen tried everything, using her intelligence, the courage she could muster, doing her best to find food and stay alive. But the struggle to survive was hard, and the fear of being found by those who roamed the dry desert lands, outlaws who had made violence their only mission, intensified with every step. She didn't know how much worse her difficulties were about to get, but deep down, something told her that the worst was yet to come. The stories she'd heard about the Skinner brothers, those ruthless criminals, echoed in her mind. Ellen knew the desert wasn't just a place of scorching heat and natural dangers, but also the perfect hiding place for men without scruples, willing to steal, kill, or destroy anything that crossed their path. When she heard the sound of hooves approaching, a chill ran down her spine. There was nowhere to run. The only path was despair. The Skinner brothers were a true legend in the Old West, but not a good one. Their fame spread like wildfire across dry land. They were known for the brutality with which they treated their victims, the way they moved in the shadows, making people disappear in the blink of an eye. The gang was made up of ruthless men, devoid of any empathy, and their presence meant only one thing: destruction. To them, Ellen was just another prey in a world of easy opportunities with no one to stop them. And at that moment, the desert, in all its vastness and deceptive beauty, became the perfect trap. But while Ellen felt lost, alone, and without options, there was something much greater at play, something she didn't yet know, but that would completely change her life. Jack Carter, the cowboy who once again found himself pulled into a destiny that didn't seem to be his, was watching everything from a distance. He knew very well what the Skinner brothers were capable of. He knew that if he didn't act, Ellen would meet the same fate as so many other victims of those outlaws. And at that moment, Jack made a decision that would change everything. But he didn't know that this choice would transform him in ways he never imagined. What started as a simple act of intervention to save a life would turn into a journey of self-discovery and redemption. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this topic. Ellen, a girl with an uncertain future and a broken heart, and Jack, a man marked by the choices of a past he was trying to leave behind. How did these two destinies cross at the darkest moment in the desert? What happened there in the hot sands between life and death that made Jack challenge everything he believed? What did he discover about himself when he risked his own safety to protect a life that wasn't his, but that somehow became his mission? These are questions that hang in the air and are more complex than they seem. But what happened between Jack and Ellen isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of transformation, of how a simple act of courage can change the course of someone's life. And this transformation, not only of Ellen, but also of Jack, is what will make you rethink everything you know about heroism, sacrifice, and purpose. The sound of hooves approaching cut through the silence of the desert, a constant and threatening beat that made Ellen's heart race. The hot wind now felt like an omen, bringing with it the sense that something much worse was about to happen. There was no more time. The Skinner brothers gang was coming fast. She knew what that meant. Every legend, every story she'd heard about those men became more real as the sound of hooves grew louder, each step closer. It wasn't just the heat that was suffocating her now, but pure terror. And despite her youth, Ellen understood well what awaited her. The Skinner brothers weren't just any gang of outlaws. They were relentless, merciless, and their fame spread like wildfire across dry land. They had no mercy, no morality, no remorse for their actions. Whatever the reason they were now after Ellen, whether vengeance, money, or some other obscure reason, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they weren't there to make friends, and she was completely alone without any protection or help. Now, with the sound of hooves getting closer, Ellen's fate seemed sealed. She knew that if she were captured, her chances of surviving were almost non-existent. The Skinner brothers wanted something from her, something she probably didn't know she had, but that meant more to those outlaws than any gold or riches. Whatever it was, they were ready to take her at any cost, and in that moment, she had no idea how she could escape. The desert, which was already an unforgiving battlefield against nature, now became a true psychological war zone, where Ellen's mind was battling against the deepest fear she had ever known. The sand, which had once seemed like just part of the scenery, now was an obstacle that trapped her, making her feel more helpless with every step. She looked around, desperately seeking any sign of help, but all she saw was the endless vastness of the desert. There was no one else, just the sound of hooves that now became like a drumbeat, announcing the end of her freedom if she didn't find a way to act quickly. And it was at that exact moment, when despair seemed to consume her completely, that the unexpected happened. Jack Carter, a man known for avoiding conflicts and keeping himself apart from any kind of involvement, made a decision that would change not only his destiny, but Ellen's as well. He knew who the Skinner brothers were, and he knew exactly what they were capable of. But there was something inside him, something deeper, that didn't let him simply walk away as he always did. Maybe it was Ellen's despair, or the sight of a life being destroyed before his eyes, but at that moment, Jack knew that if he didn't act, the worst would happen. He found himself facing a decision that, more than risking his life, could transform him forever. Now I want to dive even deeper into this. Why did Jack act? What made this cowboy, who would normally choose to pass by, face the Skinner brothers, and risk his own safety to save a girl he barely knew. The truth is, this choice wasn't just about courage. It was about an inner call, a transformation he probably didn't expect, but that was catalyzed by the pressure of the moment. What did he discover about himself when he found himself in front of such imminent danger? Something that challenged him not just physically, but also in terms of mentality and personal values. What happened in that confrontation between Jack and the Skinner brothers wasn't just a life or death struggle, but a journey of self-discovery. What he was really facing wasn't just the outlaws, but himself, his own limitations, and what it really meant to be a hero, even though he didn't want to be seen as one. From that moment on, Jack would understand something that the Old West didn't often show: the power of choice. Sometimes a simple act of courage can reveal more than the hero himself can imagine. And what about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you were confronted with a choice that could transform your life and the destiny of others? What would you do when fear and doubt meet the opportunity to change something for the better? Leave a comment. This makes sense to me. I'd love to know what you think about all this, and if any part of this story touched you in a special way. Jack Carter wasn't an ordinary man. He didn't seek attention, didn't get involved with anyone, and most of the time preferred solitude to the company of others. He was a solitary cowboy, known both for his skill with weapons and for his ability to maintain emotional distance. His life was made of choices that isolated him from the world, and he was proud of that. Living in the shadows, away from conflict, away from pain, away from anything that could truly touch him, seemed like the only way to ensure his survival. After all, the more you avoided people, the less you lost, right? But as happens with the greatest heroes, something changed. When Jack saw Ellen being surrounded by the Skinner brothers, he knew deep down inside that he could no longer hide. The courage, which he always thought was distant, emerged in a way he didn't expect. What made him take this risky step? What made the cowboy, known for his detachment and coldness, put everything at risk to face a gang of relentless criminals and save a young girl he barely knew? The truth is, as much as Jack had built his life to avoid emotional involvement, the desert, the vastness of that place, had a way of revealing what was hidden in people's hearts. Jack Carter wasn't just a cowboy hardened by life's difficulties. He carried with him an untold story marked by tough choices, losses, and perhaps by the desire for redemption. His emotional distance wasn't just a lifestyle choice. It was a shield against a world that had hurt him in the past. He preferred to face battles he knew he could control, those of body and soul, but he avoided any kind of conflict that touched his spirit. And then the question comes, what made Jack decide to act? In an instant of pure adrenaline and tension, Ellen became more than just a young girl in danger. She represented an opportunity to do something he never imagined he was capable of. But what else was inside Jack that made him act like that? What was he really facing? When he saw the Skinner brothers gang, it wasn't just a reflection of his skill with weapons that led him there, but the emergence of something much deeper inside him, an instinct for justice, a desire to protect, something he thought he had already lost. It wasn't just the danger that Ellen was facing, but the revelation of a hidden truth within Jack. He was confronting an old fear, the fear of losing the opportunity to do the right thing once again. Maybe he knew that if he didn't act in that moment, he would condemn himself to live with that guilt. No matter how much he tried to escape pain, connection, and involvement, what was happening in that desert forced him to look within and question what it really meant to be someone who could make a difference. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this. What happened to Jack in that moment of decision, when he could have fled but chose to fight? Was he redeeming himself? Was he doing what deep down he knew he should have done a long time ago? What does true courage really mean? To many, Jack Carter could be seen as a hero, but did he see himself that way? Did he understand the impact his decision would have not only on Ellen's life, but on his own? The truth is, by making that decision, Jack wasn't just challenging the Skinner brothers gang. He was challenging himself, his past, and everything he believed his future to be. The desert, which had so often sheltered him, was now becoming the stage for a deep transformation, something Jack didn't know he was about to experience. His sudden courage, that impulsive action, wasn't just a response to the immediate danger. It was the answer to a life he had never allowed himself to live. And Ellen, with her presence, with her cry for help, was forcing Jack to look at a part of himself he feared, and at the same time longed to redeem. But if you stop to think, what does it really mean to be courageous? What is the courage to act when everything you know, everything you've built is at risk? If Jack had run away, if he had chosen the safety of solitude, would he have been able to live with the decision to leave Ellen behind? These are the questions that arise when a person faces true transformation, and often the answers are closer than we think. The sun was relentless, and the sand seemed like an endless sea, reflecting the desert's heat like a cruel mirror. Jack Carter was miles away from Ellen, but fate had a strange way of connecting them at that moment. He didn't know her, didn't know anything about her life or the reasons that brought her there, but something, almost a primitive sense, made his instincts react. Ellen was in danger, and there was no time to hesitate. He saw her for the first time, a fragile, helpless figure surrounded by men he knew to be merciless. The Skinner brothers. The sound of the horses' hooves echoed like a harbinger of death, and Jack didn't need anything more to understand that Ellen was about to be dragged into a life of suffering. The Skinner brothers didn't show mercy. They didn't take prisoners. They simply destroyed. And in that fraction of a second, Ellen had become just another victim in their path of terror. The only thing left for her was a chance, and that chance was now in the hands of a man who had until now kept himself away from any involvement. Jack no longer had time to think. He knew that if he didn't intervene at that instant, Ellen wouldn't have another tomorrow. Her fate was in the hands of those men, and Jack, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel powerless. He couldn't be just a spectator. He was facing a choice: act or live with the guilt of doing nothing. And although he had avoided confrontations and situations that forced him to act, he knew that, in that moment, he had no other option. He couldn't allow the Skinner brothers to take Ellen. Adrenaline surged through his body. There was no more room for doubts, for the dilemmas he usually faced. The only thing that mattered now was saving that girl's life, even if it meant putting his own at risk. He pulled the reins of his horse tightly, and without looking back, he charged toward them. The wind that cut across his face seemed to sever the ties of his own hesitation. He was no longer the man hiding in the shadows. Now, he was the only line between life and death for Ellen. Jack approached quickly, his mind focused, his eyes fixed on the Skinner brothers. He knew this wouldn't be a simple test of strength, it would be a fight for life. He had no time for reasoning, no space for contemplation. The moment demanded action, and the only thing he knew was that if he didn't make that decision, he would have lost something inside himself that he would never recover. He saw Ellen being dragged by the outlaws, her hands bound, her face marked by fear, and it was in that instant that the true impact hit him. Jack wasn't just saving a life, he was rediscovering himself, rescuing something he thought he had lost forever. The courage that emerged in him wasn't just physical, it was emotional, something that transcended fear and pain. He was more alive than ever, more real, and that was something he hadn't expected. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this. What is real courage? The kind that goes beyond the body, that challenges our minds and forces us to look inside ourselves and decide who we really are? Jack Carter wasn't just a cowboy fighting outlaws. He was a man who in that moment decided to change the course of his own history. He wasn't just facing Ellen's imminent danger, he was confronting the fear he himself had of getting involved, of connecting, of doing something that would force him to see the world differently. What he did wasn't just a matter of skill with weapons or a simple impulse to save the girl. He was, in fact, transforming his mindset, his worldview, and his perception of himself. He no longer wanted to be the man who ran from responsibility, who avoided conflicts, but by making that choice, he allowed himself to be more than a spectator in life. He became an active part of the world around him. Ellen, who seemed to be just a victim of circumstances, was now the catalyst for a much bigger change in Jack's life. She didn't know this, of course, but in that moment, she was being saved not only from a cruel fate, but also helping Jack take a vital step. In his own journey, the transformation was happening for both of them, and the truth was that without knowing it, she had given him the chance to redeem himself. I keep wondering, what would you do if you were in Jack's shoes? If you had to make a decision like this, with the weight of a life in your hands, how would you react? What does this story stir in you about the moments when you've had to make tough choices that could change everything? Write it down. This makes sense to me. I know how you feel about this moment of transformation that Jack and Ellen are living. Jack Carter rode with the wind hitting his face, his eyes fixed ahead, while the sound of the Skinner brothers' horses' hooves grew louder and louder. But while his body moved quickly, his mind was far away, immersed in an internal battle that he didn't know how to win. The situation was more complicated than he had ever imagined. Ellen was at the mercy of a ruthless gang, and he knew that if he didn't act, she would be taken with no chance of escape. But the real question wasn't what he knew he should do. The question was what he was truly capable of doing. Doubt consumed him. Jack had always distanced himself from problems. He had done this his whole life, leaving behind those who, in his mind, weren't his responsibility. He had become a man of few ties, only seeking survival. Solitude was his refuge. But now, faced with Ellen, he found himself at a crossroads he couldn't avoid. Should he continue on his path as he always had, or risk everything to save the life of a young girl he barely knew? The choice was difficult. Jack felt the weight of his decision with each beat of his heart. He didn't want to get involved anymore. He didn't want to be that hero, the one who risked everything for causes that weren't his. That wasn't what he was seeking. But at the same time, there was a truth within him, a truth he couldn't ignore. If he ran now, if he did nothing, he would never forgive himself. Ellen would be lost forever, and he knew the guilt would consume him until the end of his days. But on the other hand, risking his life against the Skinner brothers, facing them in an impossible fight, meant putting everything on the line. He had no guarantee of success. The Skinner brothers were known for their violence, and Jack was only armed with his horse and his pistol. Would that be enough to challenge such a relentless gang? He wasn't sure, but there was something in Ellen, in her vulnerability, in her struggle for a life that could still be saved, that made Jack question the decision he had made up until then. Courage, he knew, wasn't an easy choice, but more than physical courage, what was really at stake was something even deeper. Jack was being forced to confront his own humanity. He wasn't just being challenged by the Skinner brothers or the desert. He was being challenged by himself, by his view of life, by his past choices. He was asking himself if he was willing to give up his comfort zone, his own protection, to save someone, to do the right thing. At that moment, he found himself between two options: follow the easy path, remain in solitude, and leave Ellen behind, or throw himself into a desperate battle to save her, putting everything he had, his life, his freedom, his own future at risk. But the decision wasn't just about Ellen, it was about him. Jack was deciding, at that moment, if he was going to continue running from the world, or if he would finally face what he had always avoided, the possibility of connecting with others, of risking for a greater cause, of being more than a man marked by the past. He knew that by making this decision, something inside him would change forever. And despite all the fear, all the doubt, Jack felt that this was what he needed to do. He could no longer live with the weight of not acting. He needed to risk it, because deep down, he knew that if he didn't, if Ellen was taken, he would never be able to move forward. Now I want to go even deeper into this. What truly defines courage? When faced with a choice that could change everything, how do we know if we're making the right decision? Jack was about to discover something fundamental, not only about what it means to be courageous, but about the true strength found in the hardest decisions. When he chose to act, he wasn't just saving a life, but more importantly, he was rescuing something within himself that he thought he had lost long ago. Courage often isn't revealed in grand or obvious ways, but in the small choices we make when confronted with our greatest weaknesses. The sound of the horse's hooves grew louder, and Jack Carter felt the weight of responsibility settling in his chest. He knew what was at stake. There was no turning back. He had come this far, made the decision to face the Skinner brothers, and now it was time to act. The adrenaline surged through his veins intensely, but at the same time, he maintained a calmness that was almost unsettling. He wasn't afraid. The reality was, if he didn't take action, Ellen would be taken to a terrible fate, with no chance of survival. Jack knew he couldn't allow that. With the precision of a man accustomed to battles, Jack drew his pistol with the skill of someone who had been through many situations like this. But what truly stood out was not just his weapon skills, It was his sharp mind, every movement calculated, every breath measured. He was in perfect sync with the moment, as if somehow the desert, the heat, the dry wind had prepared him to act this way. There was no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes. He knew that if he failed, Ellen's life would end there, and somehow he knew that failure was not an option. As the Skinner brothers approached, Jack positioned himself strategically, studying his enemies, analyzing every detail. He observed the movement of the outlaws, the way they positioned themselves, the confidence that showed on their faces. They were used to intimidating, to terrorizing. They were the threat, and their perception was that they could do whatever they wanted. But Jack knew that even in such an unequal scenario, there was always a chance. He couldn't rely on brute strength. He relied on his precision, his sharpened instinct. The moment was silent, like a thread of tension about to snap. In a swift movement, Jack fired. The bullet sliced through the air with deadly precision. One of the Skinner brothers fell to the ground before he had time to react, while the others turned, shocked, trying to understand what had just happened. Jack had made such a precise strike that no one expected it. In that moment, he became more than just a cowboy facing a gang of criminals. He became an example of a calculated action, a person who knew exactly what to do to change the course of destiny. What happened next was surprising. No one, not even Jack, expected him to do what he did. The skill he demonstrated wasn't just about shooting with precision. It was about taking control of a situation where another person's life was at risk and acting decisively enough to leave the Skinner brothers stunned. The gang, which had always held the power to control the situation, now found themselves facing a man who had nothing left to lose. They underestimated Jack, and that mistake would cost them the chance to take Ellen away. The scene that followed was a direct, quick, and brutal confrontation. Jack used his experience to maneuver around the outlaws, moving with a grace and precision that seemed out of place for the desperate situation they were in. Every strike was accurate, every movement calculated. He didn't hesitate. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that if he didn't act with the necessary speed, he would lose everything. He was facing a battle that transcended the physical. It was a confrontation of wills, a fight for the survival of something deeper, of Ellen and perhaps of his own redemption. But what really happened there between Jack and the Skinner brothers wasn't just a clash of brute strength. It was a battle that reveals how our decisions can be shaped not only by the situation we're in, but also by the silent courage that moves us. Jack wasn't fighting just to save Ellen. He was fighting against his own fears, his own limitations, and in the end, against the idea that he would always be a solitary man, removed from any true connection. Now I want to dive even deeper into this. What does it really mean to act with courage? Could it be that true courage isn't in the great battles, but in the quieter moments, when we face an impossible choice? Jack didn't act only with his hands. He acted with his heart, with a decision that the time had come to change, to make a difference. And in doing so, he didn't just change Ellen's life, but his own as well. The decision he made to face the Skinner brothers wasn't about being a hero or a savior. It was about doing what's right when the path is uncertain, about standing up when the only thing left is courage. And I ask you, how many times have you found yourself in a situation where acting wasn't easy, where you had to decide between doing what was right or letting fear paralyze you? Leave a comment. I'm on this journey too. I want to know what you think about this idea of courage and how you would handle a situation like this. The silence that followed the confrontation was almost surreal. The sound of the horses' hooves slowly dissipated, and the echo of the bullets fired by Jack still reverberated in the hot desert air. Ellen was safe, but the impact of that decision was starting to settle on Jack in a way he couldn't have imagined. He had done the unthinkable. He had acted. For a long time, Jack Carter had lived his life on the sidelines, keeping his distance from others, avoiding involvement. He believed that by doing so, he could avoid pain, suffering, and maybe even loss. But what he didn't know was that by risking himself for Ellen, by confronting his own fears and limitations, he was discovering something much deeper about himself. He was allowing himself to be more than a solitary man. He was becoming someone who made a difference in someone else's life. Now, with Ellen safe at his side, Jack couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed. He looked at her, a girl who, until that moment, had seemed to be just a victim of the Skinner brothers' cruelty. But now she was also a reflection of a hidden truth within him, that life could be different, that he could finally choose to take risks for good. He could be more than the man who always ran away. He could be a man who, by acting, changed the course of a life, who did what many would consider impossible. And the most surprising part was that this action, this sudden courage, didn't just change Ellen's destiny, but also Jack's. He now knew that he didn't need to isolate himself. He didn't have to live in fear of getting involved. He had the ability to make a difference, to risk something greater than himself. This realization filled him with a sense of fulfillment he had never known he was searching for. Something inside him had been reconfigured. He was beginning to understand, perhaps for the first time, the true value of his actions and how they could impact not only the life of those around him, but his own as well. Jack's courage would now become a legend. That action, which seemed so simple but took so much from him, would be remembered not only by those who lived through it, but by everyone who heard the story of the lone cowboy who defied the impossible to save a life. Jack Carter wasn't just saving Ellen, he was creating a legacy. He was showing that the true strength of a cowboy isn't measured by skill with a pistol or by the ability to survive the worst moments. It's measured by the courage to act when everything seems lost, by the compassion to lend a hand when no one else would, and by the sacrifice of putting oneself at risk to ensure that another human being has a chance. This action would become a milestone in the history of Old West cowboys, an example of courage, compassion, and sacrifice that would transcend time. Jack Carter's name would be remembered not as the cowboy who chose solitude, but as the one who chose humanity, who, in the face of a difficult choice, didn't retreat, but did what was right. He wasn't just a spectator of life. He was an active participant, someone who transformed the world around him, and somehow he had transformed himself as well. Now, looking at Ellen, finally free from the clutches of the Skinner brothers, Jack found himself facing a new reality. He knew the world around him was still unforgiving, that the struggle for survival in the Old West would continue. But somehow, everything felt different. He knew that if he had to face more battles, he would do it differently. He had become something more, a hero. But unlike what he imagined, he wasn't the kind of hero who relied solely on strength or skill to win. He was the kind of hero who used his courage to make decisions that would change everything. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Jack wasn't just changing Ellen's fate, he was changing his own fate. When we look at the moments that truly define who we are, it's often not the grand achievements, but rather the small choices, the actions we take when fear and doubt are in play. Jack chose to act, and that choice transformed him into something more, and the impact of that choice would be felt by many, including himself. Have you ever had a moment where you had to make such a difficult decision, one that could change the course of your life and the lives of others? How do you handle those moments of transformation, where the fear is great, but the need to do what's right is even greater? Leave a comment. This makes sense to me. I want to know what you think about this journey of courage and transformation that Jack and Ellen went through, and how it could reflect in your own story. Jack Carter looked at Ellen and saw something he never thought possible. He, who had always kept his distance from everything and everyone, now felt something deep inside himself, a sense that by doing what seemed impossible, he had truly changed something in his own destiny. Not just hers. He had risked everything, put everything on the line, and not only saved a life, but also rescued a part of himself he thought was lost. Up until that moment, Jack had lived with the idea that being solitary was safer, that living apart from others, with no bonds, no involvement, was the smartest way to avoid pain and life's complications. But when he saw Ellen being threatened, something within him changed. He could no longer ignore the call of what was right. He left behind the fear of pain, of loss, and did what he knew he had to do. And that action, seemingly simple, became a turning point not just in her life, but in his as well. Sometimes the most significant decisions don't come in the form of grand plans or epic changes. Often they show up quietly, like a whisper amid the chaos, asking us to take action. One single choice can completely transform the trajectory of a life. And at that moment, Jack had the courage to do what was right, to risk everything for something that seemed out of his reach. For the first time, he was allowing himself to make a real difference in the world, allowing himself to be more than the isolated and cold figure he had become over the years. But the truth is, by saving Ellen, Jack wasn't just rescuing someone from immediate danger. He was rescuing his own ability to connect, to care, to be an agent of change. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that true strength isn't in withdrawing from the world, but in risking for it. This revelation, which emerged from a simple decision of courage, would change not only the destinies of both of them, but also the course of a life he never imagined could be different. And this is something we can all understand in our own journeys. Sometimes, the greatest moments of transformation happen when we choose to do what, at first glance, might seem like the hardest path. When we decide to step out of our comfort zone, even with fear consuming us, and act in the name of what we believe is right. Often, the best things in life begin with a simple act of courage, a moment of decision that changes everything. Now, I want to dive even deeper into this. What really stops us from acting when we know that the right thing is to take a risk? Why, so often, do we choose the safety of inaction, even when the world around us is begging us to do something? Jack had to confront these fears. He had to decide between the pain of change and the safety of solitude. And he made the choice that, in the end, brought him true freedom. Not the freedom of being alone, but the freedom of being someone capable of changing lives. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched your heart. Maybe it was Jack's courage, or the transformation he went through, that made you reflect on your own choices and actions. I truly believe that this type of content can make a difference, bring something new to our worldview, and that's why I'm happy you're here. If you connected with this journey and feel that it makes sense for you, let me know in the comments. Write, "I'm with you till the end," so I know you're on this path of reflection and transformation with me. And of course, if you believe this kind of content can continue to impact your life, subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is designed to help you reflect and grow, and with your subscription, you help this channel continue delivering content that, in some way, makes a difference. Oh, and if you enjoyed this story, leave a like. This simple gesture helps spread more messages that challenge us to be better, braver, and more human. And if you're feeling that craving for more, there's another story right here that will move you as well. Click there and continue with me, because the journey never ends, right?